Welcome to Data Dialogues, the podcast where we explore the latest trends and innovations in the world of data management. In this episode, we're going to be discussing how ChatGPT, the advanced language model developed by OpenAI, is changing the way experts work in the field of data management. Data management is a critical component of an organisation's operations, and experts in this field play a vital role in ensuring that data is collected, analysed, and utilised effectively. However, the sheer volume and complexity of data that organisations are dealing with today can be overwhelming, and experts are increasingly turning to new technologies and tools to help them keep up. Enter ChatGPT, a revolutionary new tool that has the potential to transform the way experts work with data. Using advanced natural language processing techniques, ChatGPT can analyse vast amounts of data in real time, providing insights and recommendations that would have been impossible for human experts to uncover on their own. In this episode, we'll be exploring the ways ChatGPT is already being used in the data management field and how it's likely to change the way experts work in the future. We'll be speaking with leading experts in the field to get their insights on how this technology is already transforming the industry and what, in the future, holds for data management. So join us for this exciting episode of Data Dialogues, where we explore the cutting-edge world of data management and the exciting potential of ChatGPT to revolutionise the field. So obviously I was just reading that. That was actually produced by ChatGPT with a very small amount of prompts. So I'll bring on our leading experts. Guys, welcome to this episode of Data Dialogues, and apologies for the clunky start, but reading that verbatim is a tricky task. So let's go with the quick intros. James, do you want to intro yourself?
Yep, James Hartwright. I'm a management consulting in the data and analytics space for Cognition Studio.
And Richard.
Richard Harris. I'm account director for Ignition, 25 years in the industry and an avid follower of artificial intelligence development.
So what do we think about that intro? Not bad for, essentially one sentence prompt. The podcast is called Data Dialogues, an intro about ChatGPT, the reference to the data management community, and it produced, 4 or 5 paragraphs that actually summed up what we're doing pretty well.
Agree. It did it very well, but what I'm finding is it is now, as a human, starting to be able to see copy that was generated by a ChatGPT kind of style of AI.
Yeah.
Which to me is interesting in itself. That already we're starting to see patterns in the syntax that allow us to go, well, this was likely written by a bot of some description.
Yeah. Well, let's assume that. So I was going to say, James, this for you probably. Let's assume someone listening to this or watching this has been living under a rock and hasn't yet had a go at playing with ChatGPT or read an article. Can you give us the quick summary of kind of what it is and what it can do?
Yep. So it comes under the broad label of a generative AI. And what that really means is that it's been supplied with lots and lots of information on a massive range of topics, trawled across the internet, both good and bad. And it's built out what's called a large language model. So I've equated it to something like picking a child at the age of 3, 4, 5, when it started to understand language, and just feeding that child with tons upon tons of information. Yeah. Throwing it into a school and giving it every single topic and just go learn, suck all this information in. So it's getting a whole ton of stuff that's out there on the internet, in Wikipedia, in science articles, etc., etc. What it's also doing in there, though, is picking up tones of voice, picking up the ways of speaking. So what we're finding in ChatGPT is if you move away from just doing a Google search style query and ask it in the tone, in a strain, like we just did in the data dialogues, it actually starts feeling human because it's using the language and the constructs and the context around there in line with those things. you can get it to do some weird things, like do a very serious scientific article in a playful nature. So it's actually able to start doing those pieces. So there's some real powerful, strong stuff that it can lean upon. It's built a neural net up, but we do need to take care. There's lots of people going, no, it has consciousness now. It responded to me and etc. It's like, we're not quite there yet. It's doing a really fantastic job under the Turing style test of feeling like it is. And there's a few pieces there going, well, is that actually all right? Is that good enough? Do we need it to get any further? But yeah, the fact that you've got this thing, this neural net that's brought together a whole ton of knowledge and information and used taxonomies and ontologies of language and constructs and hierarchies, that it is actually getting, it's getting very, very powerful to be able to respond to various things that we want to ask it.
Yeah. I think the important thing to remember, though, is how it's generating the text. It's not thinking about the answer and then constructing a response. It's quite literally generating a word and then deciding what is the next best word to put on that screen that meets the criteria. So when you think about it in those terms, yes, it's tremendously clever, and what it's doing is providing you with an output, but it very much is responding to an algorithm. I don't think we can attribute consciousness to it in any way, shape, or form.
No, of course not. Yeah, interesting that in some ways it could pass the Turing test, but obviously in other ways it's clearly still very artificial.
It's already passed the bar in some US states and passed medical exams. So yes, it is a very clever tool for sure.
All right, well let's jump into the anecdotes bit of the session today. So Rich, in your life, what conversations has it driven? Where's it popped up? Have you used it, and what have you used it for?
It's interestingly, for me, one of the great things and maybe the dangerous things about something like ChatGPT is the number of people that have been exposed to it and are now starting to understand a bit more about the power and potential of AI, but also hearing some of those uses. So me personally, I've used it both professionally and in my own life. Professionally, I produce a lot of content in terms of written reports, presentations, and the like. And I'm finding that ChatGPT can pull together information that I need far quicker than if I went on and did individual Google searches, wrote it all up, summarized it down. I can simply go to ChatGPT and say, tell me this in this kind of tone. For example, just recently, somebody asked me, were there any articles or papers published on the critical success factors for a data vault project? And it responded, well, no, there are no studies available, but there's lots of information around what would make a good project, and it broke it down into having the right skills and technology and agile process and those kinds of things. So it answered the question, what would I need to make sure I'm successful in Data Vault very, very well. In my personal life, my mother-in-law is an educator, and she and I were talking about the power of this tool for example, kids with dyslexia or with some learning difficulties. They're afraid to ask the question in class. To have a tool like this where they can come home and say, explain to me the nervous system in the manner of a year 9 student is tremendously powerful. Being able to ask it questions in real time, and as you say, it conversing with the student, I think is going to start, making, make some changes in education. And I think from the people I've spoken to, particularly at universities, where the conversation seems to be going is that we're not going to be so focused on people knowing stuff in their heads, but more knowing what the right question to ask is and how to question what's being presented in order to refine and get to the heart of the matter. And I think, to me, that's an interesting switch that would, that we will see, forcing people to think more carefully about what actual question should I be asking in order to get the results of what I need?
Yeah, the education thing's quite interesting. I was in a cafe and I was talking with my wife about it, but the waiter overheard, and the excitement on his face to chat to someone about ChatGPT. Turns out he's a uni student, and he was actually struggling with, a math process, and used ChatGPT to actually have it break down the math process, and he could follow what it was doing better than what he could follow what the lecturer had given him. So I think there's great potential for the learning side, but there's also the plagiarism side as well. You know, the is it your own work, right? James, have you had those sorts of chats?
Yeah. The one of my nieces hadn't heard of ChatGPT, and she said, "Oh, I've got an essay to write for next week, uni, and I just can't think of how to start it. What the main themes I should do around this topic?" And I said, "All right, I'm not into doing the plagiarism thing, but let me ask ChatGPT what are the main things that I should include in this weird and wonderful topic that she had." And I just grabbed, and it gave 6 entries. I said, "There you go. Now fill in the gaps." And I think there's some real strength in doing that, of getting that broader understanding and then using your own words and structures to fill in. But it also, starting from that point of going, what are the 6 main criteria for a book? That's actually helpful. To Richard's point, I also think that, we will see, even more than what Wikipedia gave students, we will see an increase in just saying there are tools and capabilities here that can be used, and as long as they're put together with a bit of critical thinking around it, to acknowledge that this isn't necessarily all your own work, but you've pulled it together, and I think critical thinking is going to become even stronger in that. So one of our colleagues, as a play, asked ChatGPT to create some code for him. So, could you create a basic API that does this? And he went, there you go. He said, could you put a security wrapper around there? And he got a great framework of code. He said, I still definitely needed to tweak it and do it, but it's just the shortcut in work. Have we recently gone back and said, hey, let me just craft something from nothing, and I will just create it or start code without going and looking at some repository to help solve your problem? This is just a bigger helper for that, in my mind, used appropriately. And in the same sort of way, that code that gets generated is reviewed by 1 or 2 humans to go, yeah, I think it fits. And I think that's the big change that we will see from, or we already see in business, that we just need to realize that there's a good point where that can come in education and other places.
I think, though, there are some very real risks and dangers here, and in particular in the arts. So if you ask ChatGPT to write a song in the style of Bob Dylan about the San Francisco Bridge, it's going to produce a song that sounds very much like Bob Dylan. And it's doing that by looking at all of Bob Dylan's work and extrapolating out patterns, and then using that to generate the text, as I say, word by word based upon the input. But does Bob Dylan get any credit for that? And it's the same thing I think we'll see over and over, that if you wanted to write a poem in the style, or a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare, or a short story in the style of Stephen King, I dare say these AIs will very quickly be able to replicate that. And we're already seeing it in the art world, where an AI can generate a picture that looks like Van Gogh. In fact, we've seen that go one step further, where people have used a 3D printer to then print a canvas that, to all intents and purposes, has the same brushstrokes, the same color schemes, the same shading, etc., as someone like a Van Gogh, indistinguishable from that original. So in that world, I think we need to be very, very careful of attribution and making sure that we understand that this is being built off of other people's original works. And I know that there's a lot of criticism of the way that ChatGPT and other AIs like it are being trained. They're being trained on information for which they don't have the permission to use it for this purpose. Now, there's no laws, I guess, so it's a grey area. But I think ethically, we have to be very, very cautious of, understanding that artists, generate a piece of work, they put it out into the world, and at that point they lose control. And I think, ethically, we've got to be very aware that when we're generating pieces of work in the style of it, particularly, that, we try and work out some way of controlling and attributing that back to the original artists.
Yeah, there's definitely an aspect of what is new creation versus what is, the provision of reference material or an analysis. There's a lot of power, I think, in ChatGPT and its ability to deliver information in context and the context that you've asked for, and then to be able to drill down on that by asking subsequent questions, which is probably the first time we've really seen that actually work, where you can say, give me this, oh, well, now give me that, but with this extra dimension and then this extra dimension. And that, to me, feels like it could potentially be a really good analysis tool for business users. But obviously, Rich was pointing out, obviously, the potential infringements on creativity as well. And it's definitely a double-edged sword. But given that we're an information management podcast, let's kind of bring it to kind of, how it might be used in the realm of information management, data and analytics. So, James, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, again, ChatGPT has actually been funded quite a lot by Microsoft. So if you've seen it, you'll have seen Bing is on limited release of using ChatGPT. But there are very, very strong signals that it's going to rip through the whole of Office 365. So you can immediately see how within Word and you can do some creation around there. But then when you move into Excel or Power BI for building queries and reports and having the ability as a salesperson, say, to go, hey, look, if we sold 20% more of these, what would my commission be like? In the CFO land, if we get another COVID outbreak that closes everything down, what's that going to do to my cash flow? What's that going to do to the number of employees? That given some intelligence on the constructs of data of, hey, here are the linkages and the entities, it's very, very much within reason to expect ChatGPT to be able to build a SQL query, run it, present you it and you go, actually, don't do it in a pie chart, do it in a graph, and then overlay this and do different colors. Yeah. That ability to do something against a raw set of data is not far away. The piece there, I think, and that gives me fear as a data architect, because again, we're saying, like, throwing, even as humans, if you just go, hey, here are a set of entities and linkages, we all know that the metadata is half of the thing, and the terms and the metadata is like, well, you said sale there. Well, do you mean that they've actually paid the money, or do Richard's just sold it and go, hey, I've won this? That all of those sorts of the inaccuracy of English will come through in ChatGPT. So I believe the first set we're going to see of this is that we will have AIs that say, if you can construct this data in this form and go, here are salespeople, here are products, here are the sales, here's the cost price and the sale price and the discount and the customer purchases and the regions, and put that data in those entities, I will be able to answer successfully, accurately, a whole plethora of questions. And I think that's going to be the first step. We will get to the point where we will be able to ask the generative AI, hey, here's a load of data. Can you help me define what the business keys are? Can you help me work out the hubs, links, and satellites, and then generate it for me? But we've maybe got another couple of years before that, and we have to train it. We have to have lots and lots of data to give it to be happy and that it's capable and knowledgeable about those various different constructs.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because you've got ChatGPT is trained on a massive data set, right? And it's doing it's doing a very narrow thing. I mean, it feels wide when you chat with it because it can touch on a lot of subjects, but technically it's kind of narrowed to this very specific data set it's been trained on, which from memory was basically the internet in 2019 or something like that. So for business use, it's more going to be about, well, can we feed it data from X number of sources, and can it understand those sources by looking at the data and understanding the actual real context and the actual language and those sorts of things. So you're swapping modeling for a training exercise potentially in the first few iterations at least. Rich, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I think I come at it from a slightly different perspective, and that is what it will do to customer interactions. If we look at ChatGPT as a proof of concept of here's a shit ton of data, and I can answer questions about it, and I can do it in various tones of voices, we already see most major brands have some form of live chat. Now, that live chat has some fairly dumb AI behind it trying to automate the responses. If I say, what's my bank balance, that's a relatively easy thing for a bot to go and pull my bank balance. But if I then want to go and say, what's my average spend on takeaway food every month, that's a different proposition. But with the technology of ChatGPT, could probably get there. So I imagine for these high transaction, multi-product, high engagement brands, it presents an opportunity to create a much more personalized experience because, again, you can adopt a tone of voice. So if it's a younger, if you're dealing with a 14-year-old boy who's got his first bank account, then keeping things nice and simple and going through step by step is a way to go, versus someone, who's 65 years of old and has a massive portfolio of products. You can personalize the tone and you can offer a far greater service, and you can do it in natural language. So the opportunity for saving, money, operational efficiency, but mostly giving individuals a much better experience online, I think will be the big thing.
What about the governance aspect and the security aspect there? If let's say the path of this is to lead to give an AI access to all your sources and then have it do your analysis for you so that your data science, how do you trust the answer for that? Like, James, this is probably definitely your area, right? How do you, if you just say, AI, go look at all the data we have in the organization, and then when I ask you, give me sales by state, by month, by sales rep, by this, by that, whatever, how do you trust that it's giving you the right answer? Right now, we do a lot of effort and a lot of work on governance and security and those sorts of things to make sure that people can actually trust what they're seeing. How do you trust an AI?
Yeah, let me pick on the first one in that security aspect, is that just as in business, getting that information, if you've got a BI developer who's creating stuff for you, they're doing that on the basis of doing that for the role that you have. So you're granting access to a role, to a group. So we are going to have to inform the AI of what's appropriate for what different types of role, and get it, basically put a wrapper around it to say, hey, you are performing the role of an analyst within the finance division, an analyst within sales. And that is going to help self-constrain it in terms of the data that's pulling through. In terms of the accuracy side, I think there are some definitive things that we do, and especially in Data Vault, in terms of, we've seen the raw data, we've got a true level of consistency and synchronization from source to our vault, that we've put business rules in and we've versioned them, and we've created data marts, information marts that are set up for this. So you can put, you've got a level of trust in that query and the response. We're going to have to whatever level we put that generative AI against the data mart or against the raw data, we are going to have to instruct it to only use that data, only use that thing. Not I don't know whether you've seen, but ChatGPT just creating stuff out of thin air, creating articles that don't really exist. So we're going to have to instruct it to be definitively accurate. Only use the data in here. Do not, you can take the sentence and construct it and refine it to put the SQL query together, but do not mess around with the underlying data. So it's going to be training, and there's already, so within ChatGPT process, there are humans going, that answered, the human asking the question goes, that didn't seem right. That's being curated, and that's retraining and helping the AI. So we're going to have something in around that. So that's a lot of what's going to happen. But I also think there's going to be something in a move from I want the data right versus I want the data right now. So if I've got the quickly, hey, just give me a guide, or when I'm asking the AI, I always do it in, give me a guide on how well we're doing in sales. Give me a guide on not tell me the exact number of things we sold between 12:01 p.m. and 12:07 p.m. That's not something that you would be asking it.
It feels like there's certain things. There'd be certain things that lean into it very well, like assessing the mood of an entire market or population of people, or very macro stuff will lean in, drilling down to an individual specific sales target in a singular organization. It doesn't feel like you need AI to do that, to be honest. So all right. So what's the potential pitfalls here then, guys? Like
regulatory issues. Because to James's point, you're going to be giving it access to a whole bunch of data, but we live in a world now where consumers will very soon, if they don't already, have the right to be forgotten. So if you have an AI that's being trained on my data and then I leave the organization and say, I no longer want you to use my information, there has to be a mechanism by which my data will no longer be used. And that might mean that we are retraining the AI, particularly if we're looking at things like sentiment. What is my customer sentiment at the moment? Well, that's going to change on a daily basis. And if my data is contributing to that and contributing to insight, I no longer want it to, then that's something architecturally that we'll just have to be aware of. So we're back to, this again puts governance front and center of any conversation around data architecture, data warehousing.
Absolutely. James?
And just following on from Richard's piece there is that, so again, consider the AI a human, and then go, hey AI, you've worked with Richard over the last 3 years. Now, could you just completely forget Richard? Yeah, it's not going to be
easier said than done.
I know. But what we should be able to do with it is to go, all right, I know that you're using all the old behaviors and some of the things you knew about Richard, but just put a filter on yourself before you release that information so that you don't mention Richard Harris's name ever again, unless it's the actor.
Yeah. Well, you can use summarized data, can't you? You can use certain information as long as it's not personally identifiable. So maybe the neural net or whatever that's been created off Richard's data, as long as there's no way to identify Richard, is reasonable to keep. But
that's not actually that different to what we do within the data world today. There are very, very few people now that should or have a need to look at that raw data of Richard's name, Richard's email address, home address, phone number.
Which we'll be posting at the end of the podcast as well.
Yeah, all right. We do derivations of that data. We build data marts with aggregations of, hey, we've got a bearded male in the late 40s who lives in around Sydney. That's the sort of information that is more likely to be provided to an AI, in the same way as that's what we do for any human accessing that.
Because that describes both of you, so we're fine.
There you go. I've depersonalized it enough.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So, any final thoughts, guys, before we wrap this up?
I think there's look. Anyone that's concerned about the rollout of AI, the horse has already bolted. It's now a case of you are going to have a strategy in mind for the adoption, whether it be internal use, to support your HR or other, business functions, as James said, like reporting and business intelligence, whether it's customer facing, and I certainly see that happening. It's just something most businesses are going to have to think about as in the future. We'll see large organizations probably adopt it sooner rather than later. It's already embedded as part of Bing, for example. There's articles now saying that this kind of process might replace search engines in the future. So, already people need to be thinking about how it's going to affect their day-to-day, business out there. But once it's been adopted by the bigger organizations, there's going to be an expectation from the consumer that I should be able to deal with multiple business through one chatbot. And you'd better be ready to facilitate that. It may not be next week, but certainly 5 to 10 years, I see this as being one of the major customer interaction channels, because the consumer has all the power, and it's rife for organizations to come in and aggregate to say, well, I can be your chatbot to combine your utilities, your telecommunications, your bank, your water, your rates, and provide services across all of those things. That's what my point of view is.
James?
From mine, I'm just glad I'm not one of those futurist people, because I just believe that these things are going to create things that we've never even envisaged before. That a bit like when we moved to word processing and the typing pool disappeared. That there's going to be some blocks in there. You talked about the legal arena, that paralegals basically, there is no requirement for them anymore if the AI is going to be able to do it. But then,
law firms are already doing it, James. They've been doing it for years now, where they're doing preliminary research. That paralegals used to do.
So we are we're going to have to be very proactively reactive to some of these things. If we can launch and use this new thing, but we have to we basically have to tell a consumer when we're doing these things that this is in trial, that this thing may be revoked, because there will be things that we didn't think of that are big negatives, like talking about Richard Harris to some other third party, that we might have to do. So it's going to there's going to be a lot of, right, we're going to put this out and test it, but then we're going to have to reel it back, retrain it, give it another go, There's got to be a lot of test and learn from here.
Who knows where it's going to go? But one final thought, I guess, is it's never too early to be exceptionally nice to our potentially future overlords. So treat the robots nicely.
Yes.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining the podcast today. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for others. They're all coming through DVIC, and we'll see you soon.